Express that as a frustration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Lummis. Since we do have some time, and there are so few of us, I'm going to have another round of questioning. It may not be long, but I do want to pursue a couple of things since we have you all and we have the time. So I'll recognize myself again for 5 minutes. And I want to help clarify, because Mr. Lowenthal asked a good question, and there is a distinction I think that we should clarify since we have the opportunity. Mr. Holt placed into the record this Clean Air Task Force report that was developed in the Bakken by the North Dakota Industrial Commissioner as part of the North Dakota Industrial Commission's efforts, and I also will be placing in the record later without objection the North Dakota Industrial Commission's Flaring Task Force report done by the North Dakota Petroleum Council, which has similar information. And here's, I think, why there's some conflict. The report that Mr. Holt placed in the record states that on private and state land in North Dakota, this is specifically, the flaring is 29%. On other federal land, it's 27%, but specifically on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, flaring is 46%. And it's this relationship, as I started to talk about earlier, with the BIA, the tribes, the BLM. Let's face it, when you take the federal bureaucracy and throw it into another federal bureaucracy like the BIA, it seems, it's hard not to it's hard to deny that it wouldn't be more cumbersome than on private land or perhaps even other federal land. So that's the distinction. It's the distinction between the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, which in North Dakota, by the way, is the heart of the Bakken. It is a fourth to a third of the Bakken is the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. So this distinction is really rather massive. And I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I sat in a meeting with Chairman Tex Hall, the chairman of the 3 affiliated tribes, and EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy, where the chairman was rather pointed about this reality that the process for permitting anything, not just the drilling but the infrastructure, is so onerous that there are at least, as he said, 10 permits required to do things on Indian lands that aren't on other lands. And that brings me to, I think, Mr. Ned, I want to pursue this a little bit more with you, because in your testimony you actually mentioned a provision that gives the administration some concern regarding legal responsibility for consultation, stewardship, and oversight service for production on tribal lands. So this provision that you're referring to says that the provisions in this bill, my bill, shall be applied if and only if the Indian tribe with jurisdiction over the Indian land submits to the Secretary of the Interior a written request that it apply. Can you tell me why the administration is concerned about giving the tribe a choice of whether or not it wants a federal agency to manage its land? I mean, I was just with the President of the United States on a North Dakota reservation a week ago, where he talked about, honoring sovereignty, and here the administration seems to be going against that very concept of sovereignty for the tribe.
Congressman, what I can say again is the Secretary Authority under the Indian Minerals Leasing Act certainly allows the BLM to work with the tribes in managing those trust land, that 56 million acre. And in working with the tribes through consultation, the BLM certainly incorporate their input into that. And so the administration feel, again, they have enough authority to proceed to conduct the work under the authority Congress has given them, and this bill would just interdict confusion, and the administration position is that we believe they have enough authority already to do that.
With all due respect, I think this bill clarifies, doesn't further confuse. It simply states that it's up to the tribe and its administration and its sovereignty to determine whether the Secretary of the Interior has anything to say about it or not. So I don't find that confusing. It may be in conflict with the administration's position, but the administration's own position, as stated in the last week, seems to be in conflict. On the one hand, they support sovereignty. On the other hand, they want to continue to have this authority, which is adding burden and making job creation on the Indian reservation that much more difficult. So with all due respect, I don't find that answer to be consistent with what I heard from the President a week ago. That concludes my question. Mr. Lowenthal, anything I thought you might, so Mr. Lowenthal, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think this is a fascinating discussion.
It is. I agree.
Again, what I have, and I just want to be clear, and I'd like any of the to talk in the Clean Air Task Force. It talks about in 2013 the total amount of gas produced in the entire state of North Dakota, which was approximately, I'm not sure what the unit was, but it was 335,665. Private or state lands was 262,100, which was approximately the largest percentage of the total amount of gas produced in North Dakota came from private or state lands, 46,000 approximately from the Indian Reservation, and other federal lands about 26,000. It is on private or state lands of the amount that was flared, 74%, or 74,000, or 29% was on private or state lands. Other federal lands was the 27%. And so when you just compare, even though the largest amount was on private or state, that is, the largest amount of total gas produced in North Dakota was on private or state lands, there really isn't any significant difference between that and the other federal lands. You are right that something is going on the Indian Reservation. That is true, and we should understand that. And I think what you pointed out is possibly it is the interaction of other federal agencies, but that really is not NEPA. That is another problem that we probably should address, why it becomes so difficult. Because if we just look at the state and private versus federal, it's not NEPA that's doing it in North Dakota in terms of producing the difficulties or that we're seeing that we need a solution to this problem. The solution looks at that interaction and the inability to coordinate federal agencies and to do that in a more succinct way. And I think that's something that we potentially might want to look at and work on. But I think that as Mr. Holt, ranking member, has said, if we go down this road, we may be solving a problem that doesn't exist. And it may have some help, but it really might be solving the wrong problem. Not that there's not a problem, and especially we see on tribal lands, there is something is going on, and that you have identified, and that is really true. My other question I'd like to ask to Mr. Frost is what makes oil and gas pipelines different than the other kinds of infrastructure that the National Park Service has now the authority to permit on park lands? Why is it different?
There you go. You know, oil and gas has a lot of infrastructure associated with it. They have pump houses, there's a lot of maintenance, there's roads. And so just the footprint of the oil and gas pipeline necessary to move the material has a huge footprint that could impact park resources. The other thing is in the case of an oil spill, the potential to damage resources, both short-term and long-term, are inherently much larger than a transmission line. You know, if a transmission line tips over, you know, it's going to maybe knock some trees down or something. But let's look at an example. Back in 1996 at Chattanooga and Chickamauga National Battlefield, there was a 100,000-gallon oil spill that went into the park. Only 2,000 gallons was recovered. So that means 98,000 gallons of oil is still in the park somewhere. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge difference in terms of the potential impact and then the infrastructure impact needed to sort of support the facilities.
Thank you. Ms. Mall, I have a question. Your organization pays a lot of attention to NEPA reviews, I would assume. Are you aware of any environmental impact statements on gas gathering pipelines that have been particularly contentious or challenged by environmental groups?
I'm not, no.
Thank you. I wonder if Mr. Lund, if you're aware of any environmental impact statements on gas gathering pipelines that have been particularly contentious or challenged by environmental groups?
I'm not aware of any either.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And I now recognize Ms. Lummis for 5 minutes for a second round of
Well, I
questions.
thank the chairman, and I'm delighted to hear Mr. Lowenthal say that we have problems on Indian lands
Right,
with
that-
regard to multiple layers of bureaucracy. And